destroyed. Warning, incoming
Target
missile.
spotted.
Missile critical damage.
Go for it.
Target
Welcome
spotted.
to the channel, Gaming Army. Sorry you had to see that.
Target spotted.
For this video in the Ultimate Challenge series, we're going to be changing things up a bit.
New target
In this
acquired.
episode, we will not be looking at one mech review, but actually
target
3
acquired.
different urban mech chassis. The reason for this is twofold. Number one, aside from the weapons loadouts, the mechs are very similar, and so were the results on the battlefield.
Acquired.
Number two, and more importantly, I can only take so much abuse in the drops.
At 25%.
So with that said, we'll be looking at the R68 Urban Mech, the R80 Urban Mech, and the R63 Urban Mech. And while we discuss them, the highlights of what I want to call the lowlights will play out in the background. For those of you not familiar with the rules of the Ultimate Challenge series, I am going into battle in stock mechs. That means no alterations to the mech or the weapons loadout, no consumables on board, and I'm not allowed to unlock any of the skill nodes. And at the end, I'll rate the performance, and that's going to be based on our famous 5-turd rating systems. So let's roll up our sleeves and get into these mechs. So to kick things off properly, we need to start at the beginning, and the first thing we want to discuss is the quirks. So taking a quick look at the R63, there are some nice buffs to the armor, which is to be expected on an urban mech. Secondly, you'll notice there are some ammo capacity buffs, and while they look incredibly nice, they're actually very, very necessary on a 30-tonner for you to be able to get any kind of meaningful ammunition stored in this mech. And rounding things out, there are some very nice quirks to ballistic firepower, most notably range and cooldown, and that's what helps out the LB10 on this build. Next up, we're going to take a look at the R68. Now, a couple things we expect to find are there, and that is the buffs to the armor, that's to be expected. Some ammo capacity, I think that's to be expected as well, since this is only a 30-ton mech. Where it gets interesting is it has a nice basic firepower quirk of minus 15% cooldown on the missiles, and very interesting down lower is a minus 25% overheat damage taken quirk. And those two things combined could make for some very interesting build shenanigans. Turning our attention to the R80, we find armor buff quirks, as to be expected on an urban mech, some very basic firepower quirks, and that's centered around the PPC heat generation. We also get the minus 25% overheat damage buff, similar to the R68, and very interestingly, since this unit comes with ECM, it has an ECM detection reduction of 10%. Joining the battlefield action on this one, you've been watching a domination match on Hibernal Rift playing out in the background, and I've gotten incredibly lucky twice in the same drop. The first time was the fact that some of my teammates held up in Delta 3, I was able to join them and not get left behind, and the second time was when the enemy chose to stay in the Charlie 4, Delta 4 low groundish area that allowed me to move in and actually engage them at a decent range based on the speed this mech shows. The last one standing is going to be hunted down by my teammates. I am not going to put you through the pain of watching this because I am way too slow to hunt down anything. Let's just jump over to the end screen, and that shows we wound up with 1 kill, 4 assists, 269 damage done. Moving on to our next drop, this is a skirmish match on HPG Manifold, and we're going to let that play out in the background while we move on to discuss the specific builds. Now, these 3 chassis all share a couple of similar characteristics. Number 1, all three of them have a top speed of a blistering 32.4 kph. They all have jump jets. The only notation there is the R80 has more of them, so it can jump a little higher and further than the other two. Other than that, they do change things up, so let's get into the specific builds on the specific chassis. First up, let's pop the hood and take a look at the R63. And under the hood we find that big LB-10 autocannon in the right arm, and it's paired up with one small laser and one small pulse laser, giving it a whopping alpha of 17.8 damage. And that's it. This is a pretty basic mech. Standard engine, jump jets we mentioned. That's all there is to the R63. Switching gears and looking at the R68, this one is rather interesting under the hood. In the right arm is an MRM-30. It's also paired up with a small laser and one small pulse laser for backup. Now, the damage output is substantially higher, 37.7 alpha on this. And again, there's our jump jets that we've seen before, as well as the standard engine. Moving on to the R80, this is where things get changed up and get rather interesting. Looking under the hood in the R80, we have a single snub-nose PPC in the right arm, that single small laser yet again, and the single small pulse laser, but we also have a tag unit. Still have the standard engine, still have jump jets, but more of them. And the very interesting thing is, yes, that nice orange box, this one comes with ECM, and that is incredibly helpful to keep your observability down on the battlefield and allow you to actually get into some positions before you get focused and put down. Jumping back into the action on this particular drop, we have gotten extremely lucky yet again. The slow speed of my mech meant I came into the center of the map just as the enemy was starting its NASCAR run to the right, which brought them right into where my mech was setting up. We actually managed to engage in the battle, but this is where the luck runs out. With the death of the Sun Spider, the rest of the enemy team is just too fast, too evasive for me to be effective. So again, I'm going to save you some pain. Cut to the end screen. We wind up with 141 damage done, 3 assists, and we got 2 kills in this drop. Heading into final thoughts and impressions on the Urban Mechs, we're going to let a domination match from Grim Plexus play out in the background, and I do want to put a reminder out. If you've enjoyed yourself with the content thus far, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future content like this. So, taking a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly dealing with these Urban Mech chassis. Keep in mind, these comments are based on the vanilla versions of these hitting the battlefield. As far as the good, well, all 3 of them have jump jets. I do like my maneuverability, so the jump jets are handy. The R80 comes with ECM. That's incredibly invaluable, and I do have to say, for the record, it did keep me unobserved many times on the battlefield, so it is definitely worth its weight in gold. So that's the good. There's not much else to go beyond those 2 points. Now we get into the ugly truth about these Urban Mechs. So the first negative is it's kind of an intangible. It's the firepower and how it feels. It just feels so lacking in firepower. But if you actually sit back and look at it, the Alpha Strikes aren't giant, they're not huge, but they are kind of middle of the road for light mechs. It just feels so much less on the battlefield, and I can't quite put my finger on it. It may have something to do with poor ranges because you can't get into optimal weapons ranges in these mech chassis. The next thing is the armor. Urban mechs are known for being notoriously tanky and hard to bring down, but I've got to be honest, I just didn't feel it on the battlefield. I felt like I was getting focused and taken out way too quickly and easily. The other thing that I was noticing is I was getting focused with missiles left and right. I think both of those issues go back to not having any skill nodes unlocked for radar deprivation, not having any skill nodes to add to the armor bonuses, and overall speed as well. Not being as fast and maneuverable as other urban mechs on the battlefield allowed the enemy to focus specific components on my mech time and time again. And that segs us into the number one complaint on these mechs, and that is lack of speed. It is so crucial. There were so many times that I was getting left behind or separated from my group. And it's very dejecting when you're getting outrun and outpaced by an annihilator and left in the dust. Also, there were times where I was caught in the open with nowhere to go and just had to keep plugging along at 32.4 kph. And the worst part is if I was spotted and focused, I lacked any kind of meaningful speed to escape and evade the enemy. So there you have it in a nutshell. A lot of this comes down to speed, and a last parting note that I will make is if you're having trouble with positioning and not knowing how to position your mech on the battlefield, take one of these bad boys to the battlefield in vanilla condition. It will force you to learn positioning within the team very, very quickly. This is a very hard learning curve. New mech pilots out there, you won't want to take one of these out unless you do extensive overhauls to the chassis first. And for that reason, I have to give these three mech chassis the 5 turd rating. Looking at the end screen of this final drop, we wind up with 2 kills, 4 assists, 294 damage done.